right, so now that we've had some practice centering, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to walk us through the steps on this centered mound that I have here and making it into just a very basic mug cylinder shape. And again, we want to make sure that we're aiming for even and we're aiming for balanced in every direction. So before we talk about like what's going to make our finished product look really good, let's just go through the steps. And they are very, very similar to building a pinch pot. So I've got my mound that I've made nice and round and circular, which was the first step of the pinch pot. Then the next thing I'm going to do, and again, you don't want to have the wheel going too fast. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my thumb in the middle. Because just like a pinch pot, that's the next step, is to make our center hole. So as I was centering, I had one arm locked against my body as a nice brace to really move the clay where I want to go. This is still going to happen, but the big difference between when I was centering and now that I'm making this into something is when I was centering, my hands were on opposite sides and I was pushing towards the middle, or they were like on the side and the top and I was pushing down and towards the middle. Now that we're building, my hands are really going to work as one combined unit. So I've got my right hand at the moment braced against my leg. I'm going to let the meat of my hand glide along the outside of my clay mound here. And I'm going to use my thumb like a drill. Now, my right hand is my dominant hand, but you're going to notice that really what's doing most of the work and applying the pressure is going to be my left hand in this instance. I like to joke that my left hand's really stupid and it doesn't do anything at all well. This is the one place where my left hand shines. So my right hand is gliding along the surface of the mound. My thumb is stiff as a drill, and I'm going to apply this pressure to make my hole with my left hand. So my right hand is not really pressing. My right hand is using its muscles to keep itself rigid and still. That's where its strength lies. And then my left hand is the one actually providing the pressure to break this hole down nice and deep. And again, anytime you start to feel your hands grip along the clay, make sure you're rehydrating. So I'm going to drill this hole into my clay most of the way down. Again, like pinch pot, I want to give it a nice deep base to work with, but not go all the way through. So again, remembering our pinch pot making steps, we made our hole, and the next thing that we're going to do is focus on forming a nice solid base. And that's the same with throwing a basic shape here. So again, my hand is in its like little claw grip, keeping itself nice and rigid. And my left hand is going to do the work to push my claw out from the center, widening my hole and building the base for my cup to build off of. So I still haven't started to build up yet. Following the same steps as a pinch pot, I drilled my hole into the center, and now I've widened it to create a base. The next thing I'm going to do is more like a step that we are using with slab construction, in that I'm going to take a moment and press from all sides with my right hand to compress the clay and try to line up the particles as much as I possibly can. So again, I'm not building up the walls yet. I'm compressing everything so that it's all in line and ready to build with. So now I can start to build upwards. And again, my hands are going to work as a unit. I'm going to have one hand pressing on the inside and one hand pressing on the outside at the exact same point. That way nothing gets off balance. And as I'm pressing, I'm going to hold that pressure in one spot for a couple rotations. And then I'm going to move upward slightly for a couple rotations and continue all the way up my vessel. And remember that this part is a very gradual process. So it is going to take a number of times stretching your vessel up taller. You don't want to try to go from your rough beginning to a finished thing all in one pass, because that's when we start to break things. So if you put too much pressure in one spot for too long, you heighten the risk of cutting a hole and tearing your wall apart. So you want to go gently in a number of passes. And you want to make sure that you're applying the same pressure all the way up. Because eventually our goal, just like with the pinch pots, is to get them to the walls to be the same thickness the whole way, from the base all the way up to the top. And keep in mind, if you're somebody who keeps their nails a little longer, this throwing can be challenging if your nails are too long. And at some point, you're going to want to rely on tools as much as you can. So once I've got this nice tall cylinder going, keep in mind, you can only build as tall as the clay that you have, right? So like at some point there's a limit. But I've got this nice tall cylinder going. This is when you can start to manipulate the shape. I can press more in one area to start to bow it out. You can start to pull it open wider to make it more of a bowl. The shape that you ultimately make is up to you. You could even use some of the darted slab skills that we learned. You could very easily just throw yourself a nice tall cylinder, take it off, and then cut the darts that you want to manipulate your shape from there. You can absolutely combine throwing skills and hand building skills. So I'm pretty happy with what I have. The very first couple of times you throw, I would highly recommend when you are finished, before you start to keep them, slice them in half so that you can see how thick your walls are, and if they're thicker at the bottom than if they're at the top. Because remember, we want them to be the same thickness all the way up. I'm going to go ahead and finish this one out. So there's a couple things that you want to look at. If you notice on the inside, it's hard to see, or you can't really tell because of the camera angle I have. But I had some puddled water happening on the inside, which is fine for while I'm throwing, but that's going to cause issues when you're trying to dry your piece and finish it out. It's not going to want to, or it's not going to dry evenly, and that's going to cause like puddling and cracks and things in the base of your vessel. So I'm just using the sponge to soak it back up. There's also, once you finish a piece and we pull it off of the wheel, we generally let it sit and dry for a little bit, and then we come back and trim it so that it looks nice and table ready. However, there are some things you can do before you finish throwing and take it off of the wheel head initially to give yourself a head start for that trimming process. So if you notice the base here, I've got a lot of really chunky material. So I'm just gonna start to like pull some of it off. And if you've got a lot and it's easy to get to, you can use your finger. Keep in mind, you're probably gonna need to smooth your results at the end. You can also use modeling tools, and different ones will work different ways. So the one that you use is going to kind of depend, like you're just going to have to experiment and find the ones you like. And I'm just shaving off this excess material a little bit at a time and leaving it in my pan to clean up later. All right, so we've got a vessel here. At this point, because I'm starting to take the finished product off of the wheel head, I usually clean my hands off a bit. That way they're a little bit cleaner to start with. So the first thing I'm going to need to do to be able to remove this is I need to cut it off of the wheel head. So I've got my wire cutters, and you want to make sure that you're holding them really, really tight as you can. And then I use my thumbs to press them flat against the wheel head because we want to get as close as cut we can get to the wheel head. So in order to do this, I'm actually going to turn my wheel on just a little bit, very slowly. And I'm going to, while the wheel's turning, I've got my wire cutter pressed against the wheel head with my thumbs. I'm going to very gently pull it across the bottom. And having your wheel on slowly helps free it a little bit. However, you only want to pull that wire cutter across one time. When you start to do it multiple times, you start to get uneven cuts and it makes the bottom look really, really rough, and you're more likely to accidentally cut through. So you only want to pull the wire cutter through one time and then it's good. From here, I'm going to remove my little vessel here. I feel like I'm just going to make this into a very giant mug. So we'll do handles later. Because I need to let it dry for a little bit before I can really trim it and make it its finished product. So it's handy to have some scrap newspaper or cardboard or something solid and strong that you can rest your in progress pieces on while you're waiting for them to dry. You can very gently lift with your hands off of the wheel head, but I usually prefer to use some sort of lifter. You can get little metal ones, but you can also just use 2 pieces of cardboard. And how they function, even the cardboard, is you're gonna reach underneath your vessel from opposite sides and it'll pick it up and carry it for you to wherever you're going to place it while you're waiting for it to dry. It is important to know that when you sit down to throw, not every ball of clay is going to be a successful ball of clay, and that's totally fine. So if you get to a point where you feel like the clay is fighting you, or you were pulling up walls and then they collapsed, don't try to save it. Just remove the clay, set it off to the side so that you can recycle it and use it again maybe tomorrow, and grab a new chunk of clay to get started with. Because as soon as you start, like if it gets too wet, or if you've collapsed it and tried to rebuild too many times, you've got air bubbles back inside, and again, it's going to throw off the center of gravity and the momentum of the wheel while you're throwing, and it's just not going to work in your favor. So it is totally fine to give up on a ball of clay that you're throwing with, recycle it, use it later, and then start fresh with a new ball.